Okay, welcome. Welcome to the fourth event of the dMSA, Digital Memory Studies Association. My name is Aline Zerb. I'm one of the co-presidents of the Memory Studies Association, and I'm very thrilled to see so many of you here. We launched the dMSA largely in response to the COVID situation, and we see it very much as an additional venue for memory scholars to exchange ideas and to get inspired by new exciting research. This session is a bit special because it's really geared towards younger memory scholars. We all know that becoming a memory scholar can be a very daunting project. And we wanted to have a special session, especially for those of you who either consider yourself memory scholars or who are interested in a career in memory studies. So this session is very much part of a larger attempt to integrate younger scholars into the MSA. We have started a few years ago with a mentor program, which we are trying to relaunch now. And this session is really intended to be a little bit of a starting point of a new series of events that we are trying to do or organize, especially for younger scholars. So if you have heard about this session but are not an MSA member yet, then maybe you want to contact us afterwards if you're interested in knowing more about the Memory Studies Association, or if you want to just know a little bit more about what we're doing. So welcome again, and I'm going to hand over to Steve, who's going to moderate the session and who's also organized it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Careers in Memory Studies, the fourth event, as Aline said, in the MSA's online event series. And please accept our apologies for the small delay. The event is going to be a little different, as Aline said, from the preceding ones, in that the focus is not on a specific memory studies related topic that one or more people who have worked on it shine their light on. Today, we're going to shift the focus to what it takes to get to a position where one can make such a contribution to the field in the first place. That is, how does one actually become a memory scholar? How does one build a career in memory studies? Supporting emerging scholars, PhD students, and early career researchers is and has always been a key part of the mission of the MSA, which is why the last two MSA conferences featured a career panel. And both panels were very well attended and concluded with lots of audience questions, which clearly showed that they met a real need. And we're really pleased to be able to put on another career panel in the context of dMSA. Once again, the level of interest is very high. The number of registrants was 225 last time I checked. As always, the number of actual participants in the Zoom meeting is lower than that. But in any case, the level of interest is really quite high. So we're very pleased with that. The event was actually also going to be live streamed on the MSA's YouTube channel, but we seem to be having technical issues with that. So unfortunately, the live stream does not appear to be working at the moment, which is unfortunate. But what can you do? The current career event differs from its predecessors in that it's taking place online as a standalone event instead of as part of a physical conference. I can already announce that there will in all likelihood be another virtual career panel at the upcoming MSA conference in Warsaw, at which we will also relaunch the MSA Mentorship Program that Aline mentioned just now. The mentorship program seeks to provide assistance to junior memory scholars by matching them with more experienced colleagues who can offer them guidance for navigating the treacherous waters of academic life. The MSA sees its role as that of a facilitator of mentorship relationships. We provide guidelines, advice, and mentorship agreement templates. We help match mentors with mentees. Anyway, more about that later. You may also want to keep an eye out for the methodology workshops preceding the conference and the doctoral training workshop organized by MSA Forward in conjunction with it. So lots of exciting stuff to look forward to. But back to the business of the day. I want to thank the 6 colleagues who have graciously accepted our invitation to participate in this panel. They are all accomplished memory scholars who are active in a diverse range of disciplines and who work in different parts of the world. We're obviously aware that our coverage is hardly comprehensive. There are disciplines and countries, even entire continents, that are not represented on the panel. That's why we'll have a different mix of people at subsequent MSA career events as we did at the previous ones. Having said that, I'm extremely pleased with the richness and breadth of expertise of the group that we have managed to bring together for today's panel. And I'm very grateful to all of them for giving generously of their time, insight, and experience. In the interest of time, I will keep my introductions very brief. You can read the panelists' full bios on the dMSA webpage if you haven't done so already. So they are in alphabetical order: Miguel Cardina, a historian at the Center for Social Studies of the University of Coimbra in Portugal; Chandrima Chakraborty, a professor in the Department of English and Cultural Studies at McMaster University in Canada; Susanna Eckersley, senior lecturer in media, culture and heritage at the University of Newcastle in the UK; Jeremy Walton, a cultural anthropologist at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity in Germany; Jessica Young, an assistant professor of global English at New College of Florida in the US; and Magdalena Zolkos, a political scientist at Goethe University Frankfurt in Germany and formerly Australian Catholic University in Australia. A very warm welcome to you all. In preparation for today's event, I asked each of the panelists to put together a short opening statement. And to get them started, I gave them a list of career-related questions that they might want to address, but which they were welcome to ignore if they wanted to take their statement in another direction. And we're going to listen to these opening statements one after another. And I suggest we simply go with alphabetical order again. So first Miguel, then Chandrima, Susanna, Jeremy, Jessica, finally Magdalena. It would be great if everyone could keep their opening statements under 5 minutes to ensure that there will be a good amount of time left for questions from the audience. As you can see on the slide, there will be not one but 2 Q&A periods, a plenary one followed by a small group one for which we will use Zoom's breakout room feature. For the first Q&A period, we invite you to ask questions of a more general nature, which are likely to be of interest to the whole group, or at least a large section of it. We're actually going to let all of you decide collectively which questions should be prioritized by using an app called WooClap. This event will conclude with small group conversations with individual panelists. They will each be assigned to a breakout room, which will be named after them. Participants can choose which breakout room they want to join. And if you want to ask a question of the panelist in the breakout room that you've joined, I suggest you raise your hand using the raise hand feature that you can find either under reactions or under participants, depending on which Zoom version you're using. That's the easiest way to draw the panelists' attention, I think. So don't forget to lower your hand again when you're finished speaking. That's the part that people often forget. It would be nice if everyone could turn on their cameras when they're in a breakout room, as that makes for a more intimate and personal experience. However, feel free to turn off your video during the plenary parts of today's event, unless you're a panelist. I assume everyone knows by now, 1 year into the pandemic, that it's a good idea to mute yourself when you're not speaking, but I thought I'd point it out just in case. For the general audience Q&A, we're going to use WooClap to collect your questions. WooClap is an online polling tool for real-time audience engagement. I suspect not everyone is familiar with it, but let me reassure you that it's very straightforward. As you can see on this slide, what you're supposed to do is to enter a web address in a browser, whether on your computer, your smartphone, or your tablet. And the web address is wooklab.com/dMSA. You can either type it into your browser, you can scan the QR code that you see on the slide with your device's camera app. So please do so now. I'll give you just a few more seconds before we go to the next slide. So this is the web address that you will need in order to post questions. Okay, hope you've all got it. wooklab.com/dMSA. And once I click on this slide, you can start typing in questions. So the question here is, what question would you like to ask the panelists? You can also upvote other people's questions and thus increase the chance that they will be selected to be put to the panel by liking them, right? So you don't have to wait until everyone has finished speaking to start typing in questions. You can do so now. And you can also type in multiple questions if you like, but keep in mind that we probably won't have time to put more than a handful of questions or so to the panel in the plenary Q&A session. So don't overdo it. In fact, it's not me who's going to pick those questions. You can do so yourself. So in WooClap, you can not only type in questions, but also like other people's questions. And the questions with the most likes will appear at the top of the list. And those are the ones that I will put to the panel. If we don't get around to your question, you can, of course, save it for later and still ask it, albeit of only one panelist in the breakout rooms. Okay. I was going to mention something of interest to people watching on the live stream, but unfortunately, there's no longer relevance, so that's not working. I think that's basically it then. So enough housekeeping for now. On to the opening statements. I'll stop sharing my screen at this point. Yeah. So you can see the panelists more clearly. First up is Miguel Cardina. Miguel, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this Digital Memory Studies Association online event. My name is Miguel Cardina, and I'm a researcher at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. I have graduated in philosophy, and I did my master's and my PhD in contemporary history. Back then, I was very interested in exploring the potentialities of what historians call oral sources. In the first moment, in a more classical view, using interviews to fill the gaps. And in the second moment, after reading Alessandro Portelli and other amazing oral historians, I started focusing in the particularities of the oral testimony in itself. This guided my postdoctoral research on the Portuguese political prisoners, where I explored the relation between individual memory, time, silencing processes, and political subjectivities. In 2017, I won an ERC starting grant to produce the history of memory of the colonial liberation wars in Portugal and in the former African colonies. That is to analyze the reverberations of this historical event, the colonial war, the liberation wars, through the last 40, 50 years. It was a very important step in my career because, of course, it is a very prestigious funding scheme, but also because the project allows me to coordinate a group of 8 researchers working in 6 different countries and explore new thematic and conceptual horizons on post-colonial memory. Well, Steph asked us to share some thoughts on the challenges that memory studies are facing and some tips, some strategies that I consider important to develop an academic career in the field. So I organized 5 aspects that I would like briefly to stress. First, memory studies is an interdisciplinary field or even a transdisciplinary field. This means that if we understand in a simple definition memory studies as the analysis of representations of the past in a given present, then we will need to engage in dialogue with a plural set of concepts and methodological and epistemological perspectives. Second, self-reflexivity. In this field, we used to deal with personal experiences, painful or pleasant pasts, cultural canons, social legitimacies, national imaginaries, and so on. To that extent, our work is a political work, in the sense that we should have in mind the contexts and the effects of what we do and how we do it. Ask yourself questions like this. What impact can our research have on the communities we work with or on the public discussion of a particular topic? What relationship should we establish with the interviewees? Where do we publish our work and in what language? Third, it is very easy to turn our work into an individualistic race towards success. We need to publish, to find our own original topics, to compete with our colleagues for fellowships and funds, and so on. We are surrounded by buzzwords such as mobility, generically towards the center, internationalization, generically publishing in English, or excellence, sometimes or many times assessed in terms of bibliometric indicators. As member of academic communities, as memory studies scholars, students, and practitioners, I do think that we have a collective task of acknowledging cooperation as a foundational basis of the academic world, as, for example, Memory Studies Association notably has been doing. Fourth, building a successful academic profile, in my point of view, has to do with personal meaning. We used to listen to tips about planning in long term what we want to do or where we want to be, which is something I must confess that I never did consistently. But of course, planning is very important, but having intrinsic motivation for researching particular subjects is also very relevant. Fifth, self-care. Publish, but do not perish. For this, I do not have a magical solution, of course, but I know that we should care for our bodies and minds, because as it turns out, working with memory issues can be really exciting. Thank you very much, and that is.
Thank you, Miguel, for that very useful advice, I think. Chandrima, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this lovely opportunity and to see so many lovely faces here. So I am a professor in the Department of English and Cultural Studies, and I am also the director of the Global Peace and Social Justice Program at McMaster University in Canada. And I'm particularly interested in questions of cultural history and public memory. And my specialization is in the literatures and cultures of South Asia and the South Asian diaspora broadly. So I was trained as a literary scholar through and through. All my degrees are in English literature. And when I was applying for tenure track jobs, McMaster was the only university in Canada which had a BA in cultural studies, and it had a cultural studies in its name. So it was one of the first departments to move from English department to English and Cultural Studies. And the position that I applied for was called Global Cultural Studies. And I honestly applied for the position without quite understanding what that job entailed, what was Global Cultural Studies. But I applied with the hope that I was trained as a post-colonial studies scholar, so I had enough expertise globally in terms of African, Caribbean, and South Asian literary and cultural production. So I thought maybe this could convince the committee to see that I do have the range and the breadth to teach something called global cultural studies. And I think what helped me, going back to Miguel about publish but not perish. But I think what helped me with the job was my publication record. And I had published, and not just in terms of quantity, I had published extensively, but I think it was the breadth. So I had published beyond my dissertation. And I think that helped to, again, convince the committee that, I could teach, multiple things. And I think that is particularly pertinent today in terms of our conversation, where retirements don't end up in being replacements, right? So most departments are looking for candidates who can fill multiple needs and multiple gaps in their curriculum offerings and research expertise. So the ability to sort of straddle multiple fields, and as memory studies scholars, all of us do, right? But sort of showcasing that and sort of prioritizing that and allowing yourself, sort of positioning yourself as somebody who could do a multiple number of things, I think puts you in a good position in terms of today's job market. Tenure track jobs in research-intensive universities means that publications play a significant role in demonstrating one's research expertise in a field or a subfield. And if you can get a postdoc, that is an ideal situation to be in, because one, it gives you a break from right after the dissertation to start thinking of publishing, but also gives you the time to develop relationships with other colleagues in an institution that you might not have done your PhD in an institution that you might not have worked in. So it just helps you to develop those relationships with other colleagues, as well as strengthen your publication profile. So that is something, if at all possible, that is something that I would strongly recommend. But whether it is a postdoc or not, publications are important for convincing the committee that you've done this research, you are able to demonstrate the work you've done, and then you also sort of reassure them that there is more to come. Right. So again, whether it's for winning research grants, whether it's landing in tenure track jobs, publications are key. So if you're thinking of what can I publish, think of if you have just finished your PhD or maybe a few years past the PhD, think of course papers, final essays that you might have written, maybe a conference paper that's lying somewhere. Could that be turned into an essay for publication? The final thing I would say is, thinking of your research as public-facing research. If your research aligns with issues that are in the forefront of public consciousness, examples from the current context, could be anti-Asian racism during COVID-19, mental health issues during, COVID-19, isolation, loneliness, right? Gender, sexuality, those kinds of issues which are topical. And think of writing an op-ed for a local newspaper for a national newspaper if you can, because what it then does is it puts you in the radar of journalists who, when they're writing an article, they contact you for a comment. The other thing is, unlike journal articles which take months to publish or a scholarly monograph, this is something that gives you dividend quickly. It's a 750 word to 900 word article, and it can be published within days depending on the issue that you are writing in. Universities are also placing more importance to community engaged research. And so therefore, this is something that I would strongly recommend in terms of where universities are moving in our current times, but also for us as scholars, it offers us the opportunity to center our research as emerging in conversation with issues, questions, and debates around us, rather than as separate from it. So I'll stop there and happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chadrima. Very, very helpful comments, I thought. Susanna.
Hi, thank you also for inviting me for this hopefully very interesting event for everybody. As Steph said at the beginning, I'm a senior lecturer at Newcastle University in the UK. My official role is senior lecturer in media culture heritage, which is an interdisciplinary department. And I focus in one part of my teaching and work on museum, gallery, and heritage studies, and in the other part in more widely kind of cultural studies. So I think you can see already that memory studies is one of those disciplines that fits across multiple different disciplines, and that can be connected to many different subject areas for teaching in particular, even where the research itself that you might be interested in can be quite interdisciplinary. I think probably the most important thing that I wanted to say really is that, you know, for all of us here today, but particularly also for me, the path that we have taken and the steps that we've taken in our careers so far are unlikely to be replicable by any of you. You know, we've all taken twists and turns, I'm sure, on our careers for all sorts of reasons that may or may not have to do with career decisions. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into some of the steps that I've taken, while recognizing that, you know, you may not have the same steps or the same opportunities. You may have more opportunities or different ones. So, as I said, at the moment, I'm a senior lecturer at Newcastle University. I also have an honorary associated researcher role at the Centre for Contemporary History in Potsdam in Germany. I'm a co-editor of a book series with Routledge called Critical Heritages of Europe. And since 2019, I've been the project leader and PI of a collaborative research project funded by HERA, which is Humanities in the European Research Area, which is a large funded project, which is a great, you know, very exciting and great privilege to be working on. My PhD is quite some time ago now. I completed my PhD in 2007 with a focus on museum studies, and with a scholarship from the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Board. Following that, I applied for multiple kind of postdoc schemes in the UK. There are, I think, probably 3 or 4 funders who provide these schemes in the UK. And because I was tied to the UK for personal reasons, I wasn't in a position to apply for international posts or schemes elsewhere. And my applications that I put in at that point were always over the threshold for being good enough to be funded, but unfortunately didn't meet the very top cut. So it's one of those kind of both frustrating but also encouraging positions to be in, where you're told that your work is good enough, but there just isn't quite enough money to go around. And I'm sure for many of us, even if these aren't the stories,
Susanna? I think we may have lost Susanna, or am I the only one?
That as well.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry, did I disappear?
Well, I you know, it's hard to tell, but you disappeared from me in any case. I don't know if that's experience is generally shared, but you may want to repeat your last 1 or 2 sentences, Susanna.
Okay, I was really just saying that I think probably for many of us, although these are not the experiences that are often shared within academic careers, experiences of not achieving the funding, of what might seem like a rejection or a failure, is actually much more common than the, you know, the great successes that people are very happy to share and talk about, and which of course need to be celebrated. And so to be aware that this is a common and to be expected part of an academic career path, no matter what route you might take. So because I didn't get these big postdoc schemes, I took on what ended up being a bit of a portfolio career, which again, I think is quite realistic for many people entering into academia from a PhD, is to think about, you know, the opportunities that are available that can help you to achieve the things that you need to, you know, not only to progress your career, but also to manage things like, you know, paying your bills and, you know, continuing to exist as a human in the world. So I took on part-time hourly paid teaching work at my local university in multiple different departments. And I think this is a really key thing for people in memory studies to think about, is the multiple different departments that you can teach in, as long as you investigate and recognize what you have to offer, the different departments and the different subject areas that there are locally, if you have to stay local. I was then fortunate to be able to get a part-time postdoctoral research role on an EU-funded project, which very much helped me then when I got my first lecturer role, which was a permanent but part-time role at Newcastle University in 2012. And then I also worked together with a senior colleague at Newcastle to develop and write the bid for a large EU-funded project, which we were very fortunate to be able to win the funding and work on that project for 3 years. And it was after that I then achieved the permanent full-time role as senior lecturer, and also the funding for my own project, the HERA-funded project. So I guess I'm trying to say is that, you know, while we might always hear about the people who get the very high-profile big projects and, you know, do so early on, which is wonderful, I think many of us will go through a more complicated career path into academia, where you can build up skills and experience in teaching as well as research. I think in the UK, it's often easier to get temporary and part-time teaching work than it is to get research work. But as others have already said, it is the research and the publications that are particularly important for those hard-won permanent and full-time roles within academia. So research publications and research funding that you can apply for yourself, whatever opportunities there are out there, develop your own projects, find ways to find a niche that works for what you are interested in, but might also work for funding schemes that are available or different journals that you're interested in publishing in. So it's really important to carve out your own niche for yourself within your research area, because unfortunately hard work is never enough on its own. The concrete results are really what count. And I want to recognize how much I'm aware that this actually exacerbates many of the inequalities that people face within academic career paths. So I think just to close, because I didn't keep track of time, so I may be near the end. I think academic careers are very hard, and they do involve juggling many different roles and skills. Generally, there's too little time to do everything to the way that we would all like. But I do think that having had a portfolio career is excellent practice for this. And even before my academic career, I also had sort of portfolio career working in archives and heritage organizations. So those of you with professional experience as well as academic experience may well recognize these kind of multiple challenges of juggling different roles at once. I think it's really crucial, particularly as we go into much more challenging times for academic careers, to think about how you can try to make your own opportunities, or to mix up different opportunities that might be available wherever possible, to try to build up your own career in your own way, to try and fit whatever needs or other commitments you may have, at the same time as recognizing that not every opportunity that you might get offered is actually going to benefit you. So you need to really develop some discernment around, what will help you move forward in the way that you would like. And I guess that's the most important thing to say at the end, is similar to the idea of self-care that Miguel mentioned, is there will always be others who might appear to be more successful or better than you in some way. So the important thing is to focus on what it is that motivates you and what you want and what you need, and to try to find within the constraints of what an academic career can offer, a balance that works for you. So whether that's between work-life balance, job security or job flexibility, or between collaborative or individual working, think hard about what it is that makes you happy and readjust as your circumstances change and might allow different opportunities to be realized than those that had been in the past. So if you know that your future might allow you more opportunities or more flexibility than your present circumstances, try to plan ahead and see if you can make yourself reach the path that you want to follow. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks for that very sound advice, Susanna. Next up is Jeremy.
Thank you so much. I want to echo the appreciation for the invitation, Steph, and I fear that I probably will be reiterating many of the wonderful points already made by Chandrima, Miguel, and Susanna, but hopefully adding some new insight as well. I am a Max Planck research group leader at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity. One always has to breathe before saying that entire phrase. In Göttingen, Germany, though I'm speaking to you from Zagreb, Croatia today. And I'll soon be beginning yet another project, which is titled The Revenant, an ERC consolidator project at the University of Rijeka here in Croatia. So there's much to talk about with those of you who might be interested in these topics. The group that I lead is titled Empires of Memory, the Cultural Politics of Historicity in Former Habsburg and Ottoman Empires. So that gives you a sense of my general sort of bailiwick and set of interests. But I guess I want to begin by emphasizing and stressing that, you know, in this overheated climate of academia that we all occupy, there is no single measure for professional success, either within or outside of the academy. And I think each of our previous contributors has also stressed this. It can be difficult to remember that in a time of the proliferation of celebrity worship within the academy, and indeed the pernicious ideology of scholarly meritocracy. And I don't think I need to expand on what that means. You all know it implicitly. So personally, I strongly feel that forging the best possible balance between home and work, whatever home and work might constitute for you, should be the principal measure of success. This is a really important point, especially for feminists, to emphasize as women continue to take on the lion's share of domestic labor in so many contexts, especially in the time of COVID. And I think that's important to punctuate. So simply put, and this echoes what others have said, I would urge you not to measure your success by your H-index or the prestige of your institution, but by that ever elusive criterion, your own well-being and that of those who matter most to you, including but not limited to your valued colleagues. Now, as far as memory studies goes, I feel that it sought me out rather than the other way around. My degree is in anthropology from the University of Chicago, and yet I've never actually had a job in anthropology. I've been in religious studies, Middle Eastern studies, something called transregional studies, Southeast European studies, and finally, this strange niche that I've carved out for myself, echoing what Susanna said. Lately, I've introduced myself as an anthropologist who had to become a historian, who wanted to be an architect. Well, where do you find a home if that's who you are? Memory studies seems to be the place for it. And I do think it's, despite all of the pressures and contradictions of academic professional life nowadays, I do think it's a really fascinating and enthusiastic time as well. One of the distinctive benefits of memory studies in my mind is that it allows an openness and a suppleness in methods, themes, and concepts often unavailable in more fully institutionalized disciplines where you're pressured to join in the chorus and therefore confine yourself to the silo of your discipline. And that's certainly not true in memory studies. So in that sense, I think there are a lot of unique opportunities. That said, I think we also have to, in some sense, cultivate a sense of self as one that also inevitably involves a series of failures. My own professional route has been long, winding, even quixotic. I failed in all of my many applications for tenure track positions in anthropology. The number of revise and resubmits and rejections that I've received is hard to number. And now being on the other side of those sorts of professional evaluations, whether it be peer review or applications, I can say that, you know, anytime that I receive hundreds of applications, strong applications for fellowships, even for conferences, it's just frightening and saddening how and yet also encouraging how much wonderful research there is out there. So I did want to make a few final remarks about the relationship between the multidisciplinary, the interdisciplinary, and the transdisciplinary.
Nothing seems to please me. It's alright.
I believe that's Axl Rose. I think we've just been Zoom bombed by Guns N' Roses, which I don't think is in existence any longer. But in any event, I hope you're all still with us. as it happened when my son was born, a version of Guns N' Roses was playing outside the hospital in Zagreb where he was being. Anyhow, I think I'll just stop there because that's a sort of strange way to end. Let me just make one or two last points. Collaboration and institutionalization. I think that Europe and North America differ quite starkly in that respect. And we can talk more about that maybe in the breakout session. And finally, if there's a few words of advice to younger scholars, cultivate as wide and diverse a professional network as possible, constantly reflect on the specificity of your own project, and finally consider carefully where you publish, as others have said, because I think this is something that's easy to forget. Finally, persevere. And I think I've spoken too long, but some of that was Axel. So thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that, Jeremy. That was your cue. No, that wasn't planned, obviously. It's the first time this happens to me, the Zoom bombing. I heard about it, but there you have it. Anyway, I removed that participant, and I hope the rest of the evening will go as planned. But sorry about that again. And thank you for those very helpful comments. Let me turn it over to Jessica then.
Hi, thanks. Thanks everyone for coming. I should just note, I stayed at home because my office, the campus, was having Wi-Fi issues, and they're testing our fire alarms here today. So it's an interesting day all around, and I apologize. I'm hovering over the mute button, but if I stop speaking, that's why. And I'll just take a couple seconds and I'll be back. So hello everyone. I'm Jessica Young, Assistant Professor of Global English at the New College of Florida. It's a small public honors college, liberal arts college here in Florida that's part of the larger Florida State University system. We have about 800 students right now, so it's a very, very small school. One of the ways, I agree with a lot of what the other panelists have been saying today, and I thought that to sort of differentiate my remarks a little bit, I'd talk more about the sort of teaching aspect of what you can do with memory studies. What's happening in the United States, as far as I can sort of tell, is it's very hard to get an R1 or research job right out the gate. And more likely than not, a lot of people who are getting their PhDs are going to be working at least first in a teaching position, whether it's a tenured teaching position, a visiting teaching position. But articulating a teaching message, I think, is very important to at least get that first job, and then doing these sort of research panels, the research pathways that we've been talking about, to then get into a job maybe that you might want more, that is more research focused. That's not to say the job I have now isn't research focused, and there's a lot of support here for my research, which is really great. But I think teaching and what we do with teaching is also very important. I'm also a junior faculty member. I just received my PhD about 2.5 years ago. So very recently, I was on the other side of the audience of these events. So I'm really happy to be here. I received my PhD in English, as well as my master's and BA in English as well. But my PhD came from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And as I was finishing up, I was a visiting graduate researcher at UCLA before I received my position here. And thinking about like teaching and how memory studies helped me articulate like a teaching goal or a way to sort of articulate my research as part of my teaching, I wanted to think it sort of helps to think about my provocative job title, Professor of Global English, and what that means. When I was recently hired, people used to ask, what is Global English? Aside, of course, a title meant to appease our previous provost who went on a hiring spree around buzzy key terms. The fact is, when applying for my job, I could pitch my vision of global that both reflected my research interests, grounded as they were in memory studies, and then also and think about how it's related to post-colonial world literature, more established fields that I also sort of research in and across. And this in memory studies is really what made me unique and different. Global meant to me the transmission of text, transmission of memories, the transmission of information along global pathways. Memory studies makes this global breadth possible for me. It grounds my teaching and research areas in something tangible, and it's a through line with which to read seemingly disparate global traditions. This turned out to be especially important when applying to a small teaching college, where faculty members, we only have about 4 or 5 faculty members in English, And you need to know a little about a lot, especially as I teach across, as we talked about, different fields. I'm also cross-listed in international and area studies, gender studies. I work with people in different language traditions, and as part of English and comparative literature, a version of comparative literature. So I always have to wear like a lot of different hats. And memory studies, while it doesn't have an institutional presence, it does lend exigency, as people have been saying, especially with our reckoning in the United States around racial justice and around the world with monuments to colonialism. This is something that students and other faculty members can understand and feel very passionately about. As a professor in the humanities, I have like the highest or second highest enrollments of most people in the college. I actually tend to beat enrollments of people in the STEM fields, which is really surprising if you know about the trajectory of the humanities and enrollments. So in lending this exigency, it really does help as a teacher. I like to say, memory studies for me is what really brings the global down to earth. I want to reiterate what people were saying as far as how to position yourself for these types of for a tenure track job, and for really a lot of different opportunities out there, which is to embrace and enhance your network whenever possible. I'm here today because people encouraged and supported me, and I'm fortunate to have many of them through different summer schools like mnemonics or the Harvard Institute of World Literature. And you maintain a lot of those friendships on social media and, through different conferences and seeing them. I know that conference travel isn't available to everybody, and especially now is non-existent. So the sort of online interaction is very important, but also within your home institutions. I got a reputation at Illinois for just showing up to events and seeing people and being friendly and being encouraging and asking good questions. Non-confrontational, but good, productive, constructive questions. And that led to me, being picked to be the graduate student that shepherded around the speaker, that did the campus tours, that shuttled important visitors from the hotel to the conference center, and let me go on lots of really cool conference dinners. So even at my home institution, I could build that network. I didn't have to travel too far for it. And that's the benefit of getting your PhD at a larger institution, is that it helps you ground that network and really build it up. So that's one piece of advice. The other piece of advice is always check your email. You never know what positions, what fellowships, what scholarships, local, national, are going to show up in your inbox. And I can't tell you how many things I got just because I caught that email with a small bit of money that then I applied for. I was one or two people that applied for it, and I got money to go travel the world. So that's my other pro tip, is so many graduate students get so overwhelmed that they don't just check their email and put things on their calendar to do. The other question Steph asked, and I think it's something important that a lot of speakers here have brought up, which is, what strategies have you adopted that didn't work? We all have a shadow CV of rejections, honorable mentions, and wait lists. And it's a part of the job. And a lot of the time, most of the time, I would say it's not personal. It's not about your research, it's about the fit. And I too am seeing applications from amazing scholars, amazing teachers, whether it's a conference panel, whether it's for a job at our institution. And a lot of the time it's just fit and what we need. One thing that always eluded me as a graduate student was national fellowships. I always got the honorable mention, almost funded, but not quite. It was always that little hump. And after months of work, it was very discouraging. However, very soon after that, I began to realize that, I worked on those documents over and over and over again. They got refashioned into other things. They became my job documents. They became future fellowship applications that were more successful. And so I want to sort of emphasize that a lot of the rejections are not wasted work, that you find homes for those things, those documents, those pieces, someplace else. And I promise they help you articulate over and over and over again, when you articulate these things, who you are as a researcher, as a scholar, and as a teacher. And paradoxically, they may lead to your biggest successes. So I think I don't want to go over the allotted time, but I'm interested, if you're interested, I can speak more about applying to smaller colleges, especially with teaching focuses, the American job market, and maintaining a professional profile. Also, the dreaded when to say yes and when to say no to things. That's always a big challenge. I agree, Susanna. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an important skill to acquire, learning to say no, right? Okay, that was wonderful, Jessica. Thank you so much for that. Before I give the floor to our final panelist, Magdalena, I just want to remind everyone that you can still post questions on WooClap if you haven't done so yet, and you can also upvote other people's questions, right? I think we've already received like 22, so it's not like we've got a shortage of questions. There's no way that we'll get around to all of them, but do have a look and see if there's any questions that are of particular interest to you, and like them if that is the case, and that increases the likelihood that we will be able to select that question and put it to the panel, right? Okay, but without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Magdalena then.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be part of this really excellent panel. So I graduated about 15 years ago now in political science in Copenhagen University, and I was one of the people that kind of was able to take opportunity to leave Europe because I didn't really secure any postdoc or any contract employment. And so I left first for 2-year postdoc in Canada. And then 2 years later, I moved to Australia, which is where I held 2 academic positions, first at Western Sydney University and then at ACU. And now after a decade in Australia, I'm back in Europe. And so I guess the trajectory sort of translates into the first, I'm not sure if it's an advice, but an issue I wanted to raise, and Susanna also pointed to that, which is the question of mobility, because I think especially at this junior stage, that often there's often a requirement or people maybe feel like they need to move around in order to be able to take advantage of the opportunities. And I think I'm aware that this isn't always something everyone can do, and perhaps some can do it to a limited extent, right? That mobility becomes often a frequent job condition in the tertiary sector at the junior level, but also a privilege, right? That people, because of care responsibilities, health, diversibility, are not always able to take. And I think, so that's, I don't know if it's a piece of advice, like it's definitely been my trajectory, but it's I think an important question or a problem to raise, because it's something that lots of junior academics will need to sort of think about. Now, I'm also very aware that speaking today from the perspective of having had academic positions for like over 15 years now, things have really changed enormously. And it might be because I'm speaking from the Australian perspective, and Australia has really been, I think Australian universities have really been at the forefront of, to be quite crude, neoliberal politics. And this sort of possibility of securing a stable, secure employment in the tertiary sector has really been reduced in Australia, or Australia, New Zealand, I would say perhaps as well. And it has, I think, especially been sort of deregulation of state funding, managerialism, and connection between university and profitability have been particularly have had particular impact for people working in the humanities. So I think, people working in memory studies and also junior scholars, because of the casualization of academic labor, are far more, I think, affected than people that graduated like 10 or 15 years ago. So the question, I think, of casualization of academic teaching is important as well. And I know that that often is what people start with, taking short contract teaching positions. And I did do one of those as well at the beginning of my career. And I think that, the opportunities are of course there, but they need to sort of be balanced also against long and short-term costs of these positions, right? And I think that is something we could also talk about if people want to. I mean, in Australia, we used to have a really great scheme, and I think it's been eliminated now across the sector, in which you could sort of, universities internally would sort of change casual contracts into permanent or semi-permanent employment. So I guess that's contextual, but I think these have been eliminated. Now, another observation, as I sort of contrast and compare graduating today and 15 years ago, is the criteria around employability. An example from ACU, which is where I work, we were hiring a level B, so it's like an entry-level position, essentially a postdoc, 1 year and possible one extension. And everyone shortlisted either had a published book already or a contract. And we were arguing, trying to make a point about the unfairness of such expectations, right? I mean, effectively, really a postdoc should be the opportunity when you publish your first manuscript. But that was trumped by sort of managerial decision-making and prioritization around quantifiable output. So I guess the question is how to respond to the knowledge that, you know, and again, my context is Australian, so it might be limited. But the question is, how do you respond to that knowledge as a doctoral student? And the advice I give to graduate students, and the Australian context is a really short PhD and a lot of pressure to finish on time. So it's 3 years. I know this, yeah, similar to, I guess, European systems as well. So, but advice I give is take your time as a doctoral student, exploring sometimes small opportunities in which you will be able to extend that period and apply for short-term funding and grants that are available to PhD students that maybe will not be once you've graduated, right? So while you still hold a PhD, perhaps strategically then use the time to build up your publication, think about postdoctoral pathways and applications, and maybe even acquire a teaching experience. Of course, that needs to be that might not be for everybody. I definitely something that worked for me. I put my Danish scholarship on hold for a year. And I secured Marie Curie fellowship, which was that I don't think they are available for doctoral students. So do correct me, because my knowledge of the European system is really outdated. And I spent a year in the UK still working on the thesis, but really slowly, and publishing 2 papers in the time, which were sort of grounded in the chapters, but also reached outside of it. So I think that perhaps speaks to some of the advice that was already given. And I also then started thinking more about how that thesis could look as a book. I found that took me a lot of time to think about that. So I would say absolutely the hardest moment for me in academic career was exactly when I got the PhD, right? Because you were exhausted, you've just done this enormous intellectual, emotional, physical effort, and you risk finding yourself in a vacuum institutionally as well. So I have a few other things, but I think I've reached the 5-minute mark, so I'll just stop there. Thank you so much.
Hey, that was great, Magdalena. Thank you so much for that. This brings us to the general audience Q&A. So let's take a look at the questions that people have posted on WooClap. So I'll try to share my screen again. Okay, so 25 questions, but let's go to the ones that most people voted for. So these are the ones that we're going to prioritize. So the most popular question is the one about what is expected from an early researcher CV, right? I guess, several of you, and I think that's the case for many of the questions from, taking a quick glance, have addressed some aspects of this already. But if I might click on it to highlight it a bit. If some of the panelists have anything to add to what they've already said, or have not emphasized this in their opening statement, take it away. So who would like to take this first question? Yes, Chandrina.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is showing some amount of service So some commitment in terms of the institutions that you're in. So if maybe it's a graduate students association, maybe there is an equity and diversity group in there, maybe there is something happening on campus, and showing your commitment to campus life. Because again, that suggests when you're applying for a job is that you would be willing to contribute to service. So I think that's what I would add.
Great, thank you. Jeremy, you raised your hand as well.
I did, but I was going to make a broadly parallel point. So perhaps Susanna can take the mic if she'd like.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to say, I agree completely. I think also one thing that's really a real positive to do in an early career CV is to show forward-looking trajectory of where would you take your research or your teaching beyond your PhD? What would you do next? And that doesn't mean to do more of the same, but it means to think about a different way of doing something, a different project. And it might be a really small project that would result in one research paper. It doesn't have to be as big or as complex as a second PhD. So even if you can think about one small project that you would like to do in terms of research that takes things beyond what you did already, and to identify what journal you would want to submit that to by doing some research into what journal, what different journals publish and where it might fit, I think really helps.
Okay, that was great. Shall we leave it there and move on to the next question, or does anyone want to come in here? Jessica.
Yeah, Magdalene is, I know that just to emphasize a little bit of the difference in the American system, being on a hiring committee right now, you don't necessarily need a first book under your belt for the American system. In fact, it is still relatively rare, especially since postdocs aren't as popular in America. I've experienced more teaching postdocs. There's a few research postdocs in my field, but they're not incredibly common. And usually most of the trajectories I see are people get their first book out maybe about 2 or 3 years into their first job. This isn't, again, this is nationally specific, but what I like to see, or what I have been seeing, is I'd like to sort of see a breadth that comes through maybe in conference presentations of what people are able to teach and what they can touch on. If I see like a lot of the same repackaged talk over and over again, I get a little nervous to see how do they fit in? What is their future trajectory, as people have been saying? And to put that out there, just because you don't have a book or the dissertation isn't yet fully formed as a book or a book proposal is not necessarily a bad thing at this stage, at least in the American version. And again, pointing to other forms of research, a coherent research profile rather than the one project, I think is a really good and encouraging sign.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. I suggest we move on to the next question. I'm keeping an eye on the time here. Let me just close this one, go to the next top rated one. Let me just open that. Yeah. Universities and funding schemes are structured around disciplines. Memory studies is an interdisciplinary field. This puts memory scholars in a disadvantaged position. How to cope with that challenge? Again, something that several of you have already touched upon in your opening statement. I seem to remember it was also one of the sort of sample questions that I put to you. How to sort of negotiate that tension between, the job market and the expectation of the job market on the one hand, and the fact that memory studies does not really have much of a disciplinary presence at many universities at the moment, right? Does anyone want to add anything to, or to say anything in response to that, or add to what they've already said in response to it? Yes. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Thank you, Steph. I'll just use this as an opportunity to make a point that I wasn't quite able to during my 5 minutes. I think that, obviously the trajectories that each career takes will differ, but in a field, an emergent interdisciplinary, even transdisciplinary field such as memory studies, collaboration at a variety of scales is key. And so therefore, and I think that the opportunities for this are more substantial in Europe, at least based on my experience, looking for those research groups, those institutes where indeed, the funding schemes are not necessarily determined by disciplines. And that's much more true, I think, in these sort of research group contexts than it is in universities, where indeed there is this impetus to reproduce the disciplines and departments that already exist. So that's just what I'd say to that.
Okay, thank you. And then there's Susanna, and then Miguel.
I just wanted to say that I guess you can be both interdisciplinary and disciplinary at the same time. So I think about different ways to tell your story about what your focus is. Think about what is it that the disciplines in the universities are looking for teaching, and think about which parts of your interdisciplinary skills and expertise can fit into different disciplinary skill sets and needs, so that you can offer that in some ways you could say it puts you at an advantage as a memory studies scholar, because you have skills that multiple different disciplines will be looking for, as long as you can package yourself in the best way for those disciplines when you apply for those jobs.
Well, just a quick note on that. I'm talking from a particular point of view from Portugal and from a research unit. I'm not teaching at university. I'm a researcher at the State Laboratory on Social Science and Humanities. And we have here at SESH 13 PhD programs, and none of them, of course, directly on memory studies. But in 4 of them, we deal with memory studies issues. So the question of discipline could be seen also. I think memory studies as a challenge in the future is to balance the search for internal coherence as a field, but also to acknowledge diversity. And I think this is important to stress. So this idea that, of course, being a discipline is important, but also to acknowledging the diversity of memory study, which is something that is very important, as you can see in the diversity of the panel.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I think we'll leave it there and move on to the next question. So, yeah, that's this one. Are there specific sites one should look at to find postdocs, faculty positions, but also part-time teaching or research associate positions that touch upon memory studies? So very practical question, I guess. Where do you find these job opportunities? Yeah, that's basically what the question is about. Where to look? Where do you find these advertisements and so on? Let's go to Jessica first, and then Miguel. Or is that an old hand, Miguel?
Oh, no,
so Jessica, no, that's all right. So Jessica, and then Susanna and Chandrima.
Yeah, I would say that I mean, obviously these are also disciplinary specific places to look to find some of these things, but some of it is about interpreting broadly, and some of it is about creating your own positions and your own sort of opportunities. As it was mentioned, something like the Marie Curie, this is where you sort of stress the importance of a network. You can work with people to sort of create a research project and a site and a position that is specific to you and to your interest and to your research interest, as long as you can articulate how it fits in with the general mission of a postdoc or of a position that is that broad, while also sort of telling the members that are looking and reviewing what it is that you're applying for, why it's important, and what sort of what it's going to do that's so important to fund. So I want to stress the importance of also like creating your own positions and going out and finding it through your own network ways to sort of make these things happen. Because a lot of the faculty positions, sometimes it's who you know that some of these things that you might be really well suited for get emailed to you, versus you having to continually look on listservs and things like that. So I just sort of wanted to emphasize that, because there's no one real site, I think, to look for memory studies.
Check your email, as you were saying earlier, Jessica. Yeah. All right, Susanna, did you want to add anything to that?
I didn't actually. I didn't have my hand up, but I was just.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I would just say the general academic sites are there for for all, because memory studies is so interdisciplinary. All of the national academic job sites, so jobs.ac.uk for the UK, and also that, just to say, very small part-time teaching and research posts is sometimes around networking. I don't think in the UK we tend to get jobs dropped into our inboxes, but I think most posts get advertised, but the much smaller roles is often somebody who, an academic, has a small amount of funds that they can offer and is looking within their local network.
Great, thank you. And very quickly, Chandrima and Jeremy, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, I would say my answer would be sort of North America specific, and even within that, Canada. So the Modern Language Association job site. Within Canada, all our jobs are advertised on the Canadian Association for University Teachers, and the other one is University Affairs. So all jobs of all universities, as well as postdocs, but definitely all jobs get posted there. Thank you.
And this probably doesn't require articulation, but I'll say it anyway. Just maintaining subscriptions to as many HNet lists as possible is quite valuable, since the HNet lists don't tend to be determined by discipline. Some of them are, but many of them are not. And you'll find a whole smorgasbord of different positions coming through there.
Great, thank you. Very quickly, Magdalena.
Yeah, I would just also add, I think a point someone made before, that in addition to the big schemes, like I found that there are some of the smaller schemes which really are far less known. And when I was in the last year of the PhD, I went through like the whole, I think then it was printed, I don't think they printed the whole grants manual and reference guide. And it took a lot of time, but it's actually really worthwhile doing. And then you can take it as a point of departure to explore some of those less known schemes that are so far less competitive than, say, Marie Curie, for example.
Okay, thank you for that. So, yeah, let's just take one final sort of general question before we go to the breakout rooms, if that's okay with you. So this is the one about journals. What are some of the journals where early career researchers can publish their more theoretical work on collective memory? Magdalena?
Oh, sorry. Actually, I just didn't lower the hand.
Oh, don't worry.
Let me still gather my thoughts. Yeah.
Anyone? Jeremy?
Again, possibly advice that doesn't need to be shared, but it strikes me that there are many journals that are not necessarily memory studies journals. Obviously, there's the Memory Studies Association journal, but there are many journals that are not memory studies per se, but are also not disciplinary journals. The one that first comes to mind is Comparative Studies in Society and History, and a journal called Interventions is quite good. Social Forces. These are journals that appeal to a variety of scholars in the social sciences and humanities, many of whom will, of course, be interested in issues of collective memory, and yet they're not disciplinary journals per se. So that would be my advice. But again, there's also considerations about the time through which, the time of peer review. I believe it was Chandrima that was emphasizing the other forms of publication that are not necessarily peer review. I highly second that point. Having multiple different soapboxes is really quite important at all points in one's career.
Great, thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's good to have a mixture of different types of writing out there, peer-reviewed and popular writing and public-facing writing. Especially now, a lot of institutions are looking for public-facing research and things that are more accessible. The other one of the books I was reading with other junior faculty members in the last year it seems to be kind of rudimentary, but Wendy Belcher's Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks. I have it right on my bookshelf right next to me. And she goes through a process that's multidisciplinary to think about like where you might think about sending off pieces of, especially for peer-reviewed journals, and the process by which you might think about a disciplinary or interdisciplinary perspective of who might you ask for advice that might be trusted, that might be able to funnel you to interesting places that you might not have considered, and who might also have insider information of who has a backlog, who's taking 2 years to publish a peer-reviewed journal versus, what is a journal that's sort of accepting or looking for active submissions at the moment. And that's really important right now in COVID, where some journals got really slammed and some didn't. So some people within your field, faculty members, advisors, might have some insider information. So do pick their brain on that. But also, I just found her advice about how to sort of ask the questions and who to ask them from very, very helpful. So I would highly recommend that book.
Thank you. And finally, Magdalena?
I would just add one thing, which is, I know there are some journals, of course, that are just so hard to publish, but I think it's really great to think about sending your stuff to journals that you read, because, that's often where your research will really fit. If there is a reason why, you kind of connect with a certain journal and you find that that's where, many articles that have enriched you in your work are, that you could also consider sending it there. Because sometimes I think you can pick up something about the specificity of the journal that isn't even wouldn't be in the explicit description, right? So,
okay, thank you for that. I think it's time to go to the breakout rooms. So let me go back to this slide. Yeah, I've not set an end time for the breakout room discussions. I'm well aware that we're going over time as it is. We started a bit late, obviously, but I hope that the panelists will be willing to stick around for a bit longer than we had initially, asked them to. Anyway, the breakout rooms will not automatically close after a certain amount of time, right? The entire event was scheduled to last no longer than 90 minutes to avoid Zoom fatigue setting in. But if the panelists are willing to go on for a little longer, they can, if they're not feeling too exhausted yet or they don't have any other commitments. I myself will unfortunately have to leave at 6:30 CET, that is, as I have an on-campus class to teach at 7, for which I will have to make a run. However, that doesn't mean that everyone else also has to leave at that point. So let me just remind my co-hosts not to inadvertently end the meeting for everyone when they leave, as long as discussions are still ongoing in one of the other breakout rooms. So let's leave it to the last co-host to turn off the light, as it were. We will not be returning to the main session after the small group discussions in the breakout room. So once these discussions come to an end, that's the end of the event as a whole. Participants can move freely between breakout rooms, but please keep breakout room hopping to a minimum, as it might well be distracting for the other participants, and it might also derail the flow of the conversation. For example, it could lead to the same questions being asked multiple times in the same breakout room, which we obviously would like to avoid. This is the end of the plenary part of this event. Let me take the opportunity to once again thank all the panelists on behalf of the MSA for sharing their perspectives and for all their valuable suggestions and warnings based on their own experience. I hope and trust that the small group conversations will prove equally stimulating and useful. Let me end by reminding you all of the next exciting dMSA events that we have lined up, featuring most of the contributors to the newly published book, Mnemonic Solidarity, Global Interventions. More information will soon be available on the dMSA webpage and in the dMSA newsletter. That's all from me, so have fun in the breakout rooms, which I'll open right away. And as I said, they're named after each of the panelists, so you can easily find the one that you want to join.